I'm Grant Denton, and this is my Pauper partner, Harmony Heywood, and we're here with the Pauper Project. Now, what the Pauper Project is it's going to be a podcast, a series of podcasts that really dives into the history of homelessness, how where it came from, how do we get to where we're at, and ultimately, how do we get out of this situation? And we'd like to open up and thank our sponsors first, Ames Construction, for sponsoring this episode, as well as American Home Project, the American Home Project, all these projects.
Yes.
So, first of all, let's do a little history of how the idea for this podcast came about.
Yes.
We had a meeting, your project, my project, talking about partnering. And at the end of the meeting, which was at Cafe Capello, you said you wanted to show me something. Throughout the meeting, you're giving me these little bits about the history of Reno, which totally I love like little history lessons about how we got to where we're at, what this is and that is. And then you had me follow you down the street to this alley.
Yes.
And in this alley, you told me that it was the Death Brick Alley.
It is.
Do you want to tell that story?
I would love to tell that story because, as you know, all of my stories end up in historical lessons. So, given the opportunity, I will take it right now. Yes. So where we ate was actually we were on First Street near West Street. So the alley sits between West and Sierra Street. So it's an alley right there behind Ross Manor, right?
Yeah.
So originally there used to be a few churches there, and there was a graveyard. There was like a church graveyard that was there.
That graveyard was the garage for the
parking garage,
the multi-level parking garage for the theater.
The dead body garage. Yes.
The body garage.
The body garage. Yes. So there was a cemetery there, and they had just decided over the years that dirt would be so good to make bricks. Why? Well, because of all the nutrients from the dead bodies.
Interesting.
Yes. So the cemetery was sold, and brick manufacturing people bought it, and they went ahead and they made these bricks. And then all of those buildings there, that's why you see all those brick buildings along there, West Street Market and Ross Manor. All of these buildings were built with dead body bricks.
Well, and what is the Ross Manor?
Ross Manor is the apartments that are sitting right there. They're the ones that they're redoing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, it says Colonial at the top.
And you know what's interesting is you told me that it just happened as a coincidence that my family photos were in that alley. We did a little family photo. We did a video like in that alley, and I had no clue that I was posing in front of the death bricks.
Yes, you do have your family death brick family photo album, which is they're actually really cool photos. The photos ended up really amazing. But yeah, so they did move the bodies in theory. They moved some to the Hillside Cemetery, which is by UNR, and they moved some out to the Masonic Cemetery.
Yeah.
But yeah, whenever you're down that alley, I tell everyone this story. Every time I'm anywhere near there, I'm like, hey, come here, you have to see this. Yeah. Come look at the alley.
And we even stole some bricks.
I did. I did not. I didn't steal any bricks.
Hey, what is you have articles of the cemetery being sold and the purchase of the cemetery, which is on our photo gig. That's 6, 7, and ever since you showed me that, like I was totally like I jumped the fence and took a brick as well. I used it as paperwork.
We didn't
in my
do
house.
that.
and so then you know that like my business, we work with in homeless services.
Yes.
And then you told me about this poor farm. And I had no clue. Like when you do like the history of homelessness, I hear about poor the poor houses in the turn of the 19th century in London, right?
Yeah.
Folks would pay. I mean, would it be like they'd get a pence or whatever it was, or they pay for their bed there? What did that look like? The poor houses.
So the poor farm is American evolution on the English version of the poorhouse.
Yeah.
Right. The British version of the poorhouse was people that couldn't take care of themselves. They would go. They're basically just a house. They weren't really run very well, but they would let people go there to live so they're not on the street. Yeah. The poor farm it takes it a step further.
Yeah.
So you are housing people. You're housing people at the state of the county, the expense of the county, but they're working on a farm for their room and board. So they're not just idle. They're actually they were working farms. They were kind of all over the United States, and people they'd give you a place to live, and you'd work and you would eat the food and that you grew and things like that, and then they would also sell it to make money to take care of the poor farm. So it was kind of like a circle structure type thing.
Yeah, and it's so interesting how that like parallels. Like right now, the Washoe County's CARES campus, right? And I believe this CARES campus,
which actually is on very near where the poor farm was, coincidentally.
So where was the poor farm? Where was it located?
So So the Poor Farm was sort of in that area right there.
By Broadhead Park?
Yeah, by Broadhead Park right there. So it was located kind of right down the street from where we are right here, actually. It was High Street would be the west border, the east border would be Kerman or Quinsley, and then the top would be 2nd Street sort of and went down to Mill. So it was kind of like a square right there.
And when did the Poor Farm start?
So the Poor Farm started in 1860, or I started actually here in 1875 when the hospital, it was actually started as a hospital and farm. So it was the county hospital for people who really couldn't afford any care. And then they started a Poor Farm right next to it there.
Okay. And what were they doing? Like, of course, that's not when we had home. Like, how were we solving our homeless problem prior to that point?
Yeah. So prior to that point, there was, so when before Nevada was even a state, they were actually kind of trying to, what are we going to do about the poor? We had all these miners at first. No one had a house because it was like a transient type society. So once that kind of went away, you had a couple people who just couldn't afford to live. So what are we going to do with them? So Reno actually was not the county seat of Washoe County. It was Washoe City. And in Washoe City, they had a rule, like a law that said that anyone who was poor had to be taken in by other people in the city. So people would just take them into their house, and then they would apply to get money back from the county.
People would take poor folks into their house.
It was illegal to be homeless. So you had to live somewhere, even if it was with a stranger.
Okay, and what if nobody took you in?
They did. They wasn't an option. They would force people to take.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everyone had to take someone in. No one could be on the street. But the problem with this is you've got people, it's not regulated. They're not looking at these houses. They're not checking to see if these people are in good condition or living well or not being abused or.
Yeah.
So it was a bad system. So what happened was they actually had Nevada revise the statutes. To make it to where we were or not Nevada, sorry, the county. This is before it was a state run. It was a county run. So it was Washoe County.
Yeah.
And when they moved it to Reno, they just went ahead and decided to make something, a better structure, a better infrastructure for this, that they can regulate and things like that.
And I did go a little bit out of order when asking where the Poor Farm was located, but it was right at Broadhead Park. And I think we have a picture of the map. The modern map and then the old school map.
Yes. The 1867 map, there's a modern map, and then it's the 1892 map of the Poor Farm. It actually shows it right there, and it's got the hospital list shown on to the left of it, and those little buildings that you see right there where people lived.
Yeah, and 2 of those are still there, right? That I can see, like when I was working Broadhead Park, that's what blew me away, is my first, for my nonprofit, my first contract was right there on Broadhead Park, right at the Portland Loo there, working that same spot that the very first Poor Farm was on.
And the interesting thing is people, homeless people have been going there since 1875 because that was the Poor Farm. So it's been, people have been congregating right there at that river and all those little houses right there for a really long time.
Can you give me explain, how does a Poor Farm work? Like, what was how did the Poor Farm work?
So with our Poor Farm, it was actually 40 acres right outside of the city of Reno. Now, right now, you're like, that's right in the city of Reno. But Reno didn't go that far. So that was actually county property. So there was a deed for the county Poor Farm. They had, for $1,000. $1,000. The county bought 40 acres from a gentleman named A.J. Hatch. Yeah. And they used those 40 acres to start it. Now, right now, 40 acres right there is just prime right in the middle of the city. But this was out of town. It was county property. The city had nothing to do with it. It was actually a little bit out of town at the time. So, there was only one way onto the Poor Farm and one way off to the Poor Farm, and there was one bridge.
Yeah. And that bridge, does it exist anymore?
No. So Park Street, I think you and I went down there. Yeah.
Yep.
Park Street used to have the bridge that went across. So that was the only way in and the only way out. There was no other. They really had them kind of isolated there.
Dude, that's a trip. When we would do outreach up along those banks, because people would set up tents in those banks, there was always these slabs of concrete that went for about a quarter mile up and down. And I think which makes sense now, that when they took that bridge down, they put that concrete and just laid it up against the banks.
I think it was part of that was all part of that original bridge. You can see the power lines go over. They made the Wells Bridge, just sort of replace that older bridge. Yeah. But it was actually used to be called the Light Bridge because it was the first bridge in town to have lights.
Really?
Yeah, they had some covered bridges over there originally.
And then wasn't there some railroad tracks that crossed?
Yes, the NCO, the Nevada, California, Oregon Railroad. I don't think it ever went to Oregon, though. I think it just had aspirations. But yeah, so there was a train tracks that sort of separated, and there was the one-way in and off. And so everyone that lived there were actually considered inmates. So you weren't allowed to leave, which is why they only had one bridge on and one bridge off. Although they weren't treated like inmates necessarily, but that's how they referred to them.
And they were inmates because they committed the crime of being homeless.
Being poor.
Being poor.
Yes, obviously. Yeah. Well, I think it was more inmates because not everybody could just go live on the poor farm. You couldn't be like, I don't have a house. I'm going to go get a house and live on the poor farm and do things like that. So instead, you had to be referred there by the city. So, or someone had to refer you, a doctor or a city or someone, and then you'd go live there. So, but on the poor farm, it was a working farm. Yeah. And it had animals, pastures, farm buildings, a hospital, a pest house, a graveyard.
That hospital still exists, right?
Yes, that's Renown.
Which, because now Renown's freaking huge, right? But like, which Renown building are we talking about?
So I don't know if before you lived in Reno, actually it was called Washoe Medical Center for a long, long time. And that's because it was the Washoe County Hospital. From the poor farm. This was the Washoe County Poor Farm with the Washoe County Hospital on it. There is actually a hospital building on that spot. Yeah. Which is coincidentally still county property. It's really weird. There's this tiny little square that says county property in the middle of the city. However, it's not an original building. That building has been gone for a while now. But that's next to what was called a pest house.
Pest house?
Yeah, doesn't that sound nice?
Sounds great. Sounds like a trap house that I used to live in maybe 15 years ago.
It is the same house. No, it's actually where they quarantine people. If you had smallpox or things like that, they would call them a pest house. They'd send you to the pest house, which was brought over from Washoe City, actually. When it was back then, they brought it over. And you would stay there till you were either better or till you died. And then they'd bury you right there on the graveyard.
Graveyard. Where's this graveyard?
Yes. The lost graveyard of the poor farm.
Yeah, that I think, when we were talking about it earlier, that might be Broadhead Park itself.
I originally thought so too. I'm not sure, either there or there's another park over by the hospital that might be there too. But luckily,
Pickett Park?
Yes. And you,
really?
Yes, and you and I we're actually planning on going down there and taking a look and trying to find some graves or bodies.
Now, was this the Chinese graveyard that you were talking about before?
That's the one in Broadhead Park, I believe. So
yeah,
so because you can't bury Chinese people with everybody else back then.
Really?
Yes. And the graveyards are segregated.
And later we got to get into that to the Chinese over the Calneva, right? When that was the Chinese housing.
Chinatown. Yeah.
Yes. I definitely want to dig in on that later because it's so interesting.
It's also interesting. Well, despite what people keep telling me, history is interesting. Yeah. And it is cool. I don't care what you say.
Well, dude, it's freaking great to know all these things. Like, listen, how would, what would, because you said that people had to be, qualified to move in there. How would people move in, what would qualify you to move into the poor farm?
So it was a referral program. It was because they only had so many houses. They didn't have enough houses for everybody, right? Yeah. So you would... someone, like a social type worker or another doctor if you were sick. A lot of the people that lived there were there for the hospital. And so the people that were there for the hospital, if they could work, they would put them to work on the farm. And then the rest of the people were just people that, didn't have a house or fell on hard times. So they would try to get services somewhere or they talk to someone and then they would refer them. And if there was a house available, they would let them go live there.
I have a question. What did services look like back then? Especially since the solution to homelessness was move into it, a family had to take them in. So now we move away from families taking people in. We move to a poor farm as an option. But when you say services, what did services look like then?
Well, everything was county run, right? There was no federal system in place. There was no welfare system. There wasn't anything from the state. So counties and cities just kind of did everything was not very uniform, just whatever they felt was best to take care of the problem based on how big the problem was. Yeah. Washoe County is kind of a big problem because of the railroad. We would get a lot of transients. Yeah. A lot of the hospital was constantly full with people that didn't necessarily live in the county, but had just sort of ended up here based on the railroad or just the sort of, the type of society that Reno was at that time and kind of still is a little bit. Yeah. So they just, it basically was more like, do they have room for you on the poor farm? That's why it was a referral process. Okay. It's like you're on a list type of thing.
So you're poor, you don't have a home, it's considered a crime. Yes. You go to the hospital deems that you should go to this poor farm, and you're an inmate in the poor farm, and you got to work. Now, of course, there's going to be rules.
Yes.
Right? And we have a list of the rules.
We do.
Which is like, it's so interesting that this is how we're handling. Not that it was bad then, because like whatever makes sense at the time.
I mean, if you live somewhere in an apartment building, you have rules, right?
Yeah.
You have things you can and can't do, but they were a little more strict than that. But basically, because I feel like we're giving you a house, we're keeping you off the street, we're going to give you food, you need to do whatever we say. My house, my rules.
Fair enough, dude. I mean, we have rules at the shelter right now.
Yeah.
And so they're calling them patients in here.
Yes.
Patients shall be admitted to the county hospital only on an order signed by one or more members of the board of the county commissioners. So the commissioners had to sign to get them into the hospital?
For the hospital, yeah. Because it was free. It was completely free. It was for people who couldn't afford anything else.
So they had to vet them, right? So so they had to make it, okay. Patients shall be discharged from the county hospital by order of a county physician.
Yes.
There's a process, right? It looks like, so no patient shall be permitted to leave the ground of the county poor farm except by permission of the steward. What would happen if they tried to leave?
They would kill them. No, I'm just kidding. No, if you left, that's the reason for the one bridge on and one bridge off.
Well, there is a graveyard.
There is a graveyard. No, but actually, nothing would really happen except for you just can't come back. You've missed your opportunity. We gave you this opportunity.
So you can't leave.
You chose not to work. You chose to waste it. You're done.
And now you're subject to going to jail.
Yeah, exactly. And it was interesting. The poor farm was oversaw by the prison committee as well.
Really?
Yeah, so the county oversaw the jail, and then they oversaw the poor farm. They actually would send people from the jail to work on the poor farm a lot. Like they built a fence around it. They built the houses on it.
Yeah,
It was like forced labor type situation.
Dude. All right. All inmates, and then it shifts to calling them inmates, right? It goes, so their patients are first, then they're inmates. All inmates of the county hospital shall be under the control of the hospital steward as directed by the county physician. What is a hospital steward?
Okay, so the poor farms throughout the whole country were ran by what's called a superintendent.
Yeah.
So there was a superintendent that just oversaw everything. They would see the hospital, they would oversee the doctor care, the farm itself, and then they would also the buildings, maintenance, everything. So that's just the supervisor is basically what they're talking about, is the person that was in charge.
Okay. So 5. No patient shall be allowed in or on his bed without his clothes on.
Yes.
I totally get it.
Indecent exposure laws, things like that.
Well, somebody had to keep doing it. In order to make that rule, somebody had to mess that up.
That's
They're like,
what I
Carl can't stop sleeping naked. He's disturbing the rest of the group. Was it co-ed?
Yes, it was co-ed. It was co-ed, although the hospital was co-ed, the farm was too, but we're dealing with mainly white men. The Chinese, there was a large Chinese population. They were not allowed to live on the poor farm, the Washoe County one at least. And so it was men that could work and were willing to work. There were some families though. There were a few, widows and orphans and things like that. But
were there other poor farms
yes.
in the region?
Yes, so we were the first, and it was actually very successful at first, extremely successful. That Ormsby County, which is Carson City, Elko, Fallon, they all came to model their poor farms off of ours. In fact, people as far as New York actually came to look at our poor farm because it was so successful in the beginning.
Yeah. Okay, and rule number 6, inmates may be required to perform such labor about the hospital or poor farm grounds as in the judgment of the county physician their physical condition will permit. So they had to work.
Even the ones in the hospital, that rules for, if you're in the hospital dying, they're gonna, I don't want to say work you to death, but if you can get out of bed with your clothes on, then you can work.
And the 7th rule, it's kind of, I don't even know what that means. The county physician shall visit the county hospital as the existence.
So basically, you're at the county hospital. It's free, and there's not a doctor on call. He's not there. He doesn't reside there. He comes at his leisure, and he'll treat you, and then he goes away. So the care. If you didn't have if you had a busy doctor, the care wasn't always the best. And then he would get to the pest house if he had time later.
Oh, okay.
So it was just kind of at his discretion, sort of.
And that's connected to the hospital steward shall furnish nurses as required.
Yeah, usually they actually didn't use accredited nurses. It would usually be his wife or someone that would just kind of, come and help.
Dude, I've been to jail before in a small town in Utah, and actually the food, I've been to jail in Vegas, right?
Yeah.
And then I remember we got locked up in Utah in this small town, and it was great.
Was it?
Oh, dude.
Y'all, they were wonderful.
I didn't want to leave. Like the warden's wife actually made the food there. It was the best food I've ever had. I got locked up with my brother, who's never really done time before, and he's like wanting to get out of there. I'm like, hey, dude, I think we're doing all right.
Yeah. Speaking of food, there was actually an article that talked about how they were better fed at the Poor farm than anywhere else in the county because it was a working farm. They had a pasture for cows, and they had horse pastures. They had chicken coops. There was it was a full farm. They had a huge orchard.
Yeah.
They had vegetables, and they would grow what they would eat, and they would also feed the people at the hospital, which were really good. And so everyone was fed really well. At first, it was a very successful program.
Well, dude, I know we're running slim, but I want to run through that. Like, the hospital surrounding grounds shall be kept in good sanitary condition. Like, it's interesting. Were they not kept in?
Right. Well, there were other poor farms that weren't. And so these rules kind of came based on that. So even though we had a successful poor farm, not everyone did because they were inmates. So sometimes they would overwork them, but you don't get pay. So you can't leave. How are you going to leave with no money? So that they would kind of be at the mercy of the superintendent. So if you had a good one, great. If you didn't, not so great.
Okay, so those are pretty much the basic rules to get in. Now, and it seems like it was actually solving a problem. It sounds great. Somebody comes in, they're working, they're self-sufficient, and they are cleaning up the streets, right? They're giving people a little place where they can live and a little some purpose.
So like,
why? Then let's get into the decline.
Yeah,
like
what happened, right?
Yeah, what happened? Why would it shut down?
Several things happened. One, the city kept growing. And there suddenly was very valuable land right there that that you've got all these poor people living on, and the city people started to revolt a little bit. There's newspaper articles there where they're calling to sell the poor farm. They're saying that it's not making enough money now. Prices have gone up. They have to get county money to keep it going. So they're saying, either work these people harder or give us the city of Reno's or give us that land. We'll put people on it. We'll do something about it. We just don't want valuable land wasted on the poor, basically, which is just horrible. But Reno just kept growing and growing, and they kept selling off portions of the poor farm. So now it's 30 acres. Now it's 20 acres. Now it's 10 acres. And then it became this tiny little square where it was just the hospital and the pest house and just a little tiny orchard, and that was it. No more houses on it. So they just kind of kept pushing them out.
Well, it was there. Okay, so we're pushing people out.
Yeah.
The land's more valuable than what we're doing with it now. But was there a plan for the? There was.
It fell through.
Tell me about.
Okay, so the plan was they wanted to open up a new poor farm on the north of town next to the city dump.
Yep.
Yes, but what happened was right before that welfare reform happened.
So what does that mean?
So we're moving into the 1930s, and care is changing from the county to the state. And so there's no more county-run anything. So you've got the welfare in place, you've got unemployment in place, you've got these programs that are, Social Security, that are made to take care of people. But it's a one-size-fits-all type of thing, because now it's not local, it's not personalized to each community. It's just everybody's the same. So they actually wrote in the statute that if you took any county services, you could not receive any state or federal services.
Oh,
it was written into it. So they shut down all of these poor farms, all shut down. Well, not all, most of them shut down. Any kind of care homes they had, county hospitals, everything got switched over to the state-run system.
And then, so that just, and the last day of the poor farm was what? When did they shut it down altogether?
I'm not sure on the last day, but it happened, it slowly started to go away, and then it switched over in the mid to late 20s.
Real quick question. What was the public opinion on the poor farm from when it started? And yeah,
originally, people were a little more compassionate back then. They realized that you can be poor.
Well, if you're taking people in your house, you gotta be.
Well, people realized you can be poor without any fault of your own. Life was tough. When life's tough, people are more compassionate. They realize that, it's not because you're a drunk or a drug addict or this or that. It was like people lose their homes, fire, lots of things can happen. So they had more compassion. As the years went on, it changed. It was more like, oh, well, he's homeless because he's a drunk, or he's homeless because he's lazy, or he doesn't want to work, things like that.
Okay. Well, and then having said that, do you think a poor farm would work today? I have an opinion about that.
I do. In the right circumstances, I definitely do. I think there are people that want to work and would love I would love the opportunity to live on a farm and just live off of it.
Yeah.
So I do think that I don't think it would solve everything, but but I think it would be very helpful.
Yeah, when there's too many different complexities in homelessness and what the different types of folks that are homeless, how they got here, what's going to get them out. But also, but I agree with you. I feel like it would work, and I think they do have models like that. But the problem is we put too many. Like we try to solve, trying to solve all of homelessness with a poor farm is where we would fail.
That's where we went wrong with the state running it. It became a one size fits all type of thing, but it's not. There's so many different reasons why people are homeless. And so, but then you have, well, who do we let on? Who do we not let on? How do we vet that process?
And then what's the criteria?
The political of it all, the politics of it all, it becomes a little more difficult. But I think that when done well, it was a really great program.
Well, so knowing this, right? Knowing this is what's going to move us to our next episodes. Knowing and this isn't just with poor farms.
Yeah.
We're going to get into the history of homelessness.
We're going to go back
Mesopotamian times to I like saying that word. I could just say from Mesopotamian times to right now. How did we get here and how to get out? And we're also going to look at the culture, the climate, politics, what was happening at the time, and see what programs were working. What programs weren't working, what was successful, and why.
We've gotten a lot of things right and wrong throughout history. We really have. And so looking at that, we can learn from these programs. We don't need to just start fresh. We can look at the groundwork that was already laid, and we can move towards a better future with that.
And that is what our next episode is going to be.
Excited.
We're going to start at the very beginning of homelessness.
Beginning.
Yes, and then we're going to work
Adam and
our
Eve
way.
were homeless.
Yes, actually, yeah.
Technically, they were.
So we're going to start, and so was Jesus.
Jesus was homeless
this guy was
as well.
Great. They wrote books about him.
Yes, he was. A lot of people were homeless throughout history, but we're going to take a look at how cultures have handled that, how cultures handled their homeless population.
Yep. And how we're handling it, and then how we're going to move forward. I'm super excited about our next episode.
It's going to be a good one.
And thank you for joining us. We will see you guys next time on the Pauper Project.